Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Mjolnir the Movies. This week we're looking at Robocop. All things Robocop, in fact. Robocop 1, Robocop 2. Yeah, we might mention Robocop 3 a bit, but it's a bit shitty. The reboot, and we might even mention the series as well, although again that's a bit shitty as well. And there was even a cartoon series, but I don't think we're going to be mentioning that. Right, anyway, where should we start? I think we'll start with the genre, because it's very difficult to put it into a specific genre, isn't it? The original Robocop, that is.
Mm.
Well, that was.
You want to take it, James? You want to take it, James? This is your movie, James. You take it.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's a very interesting film because it's such a blend of different genres and styles. You've got comedy there, you've got kind of horror aspects and action, and various themes sort of blended together to make this, the sci-fi and so on. So that's partly what makes it stand out as an iconic film, and also why it's so hard for anybody to copy it, especially if they try and copy it authentically with any kind of sequel or remake.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, as regards comedy, it's an extreme satire and black comedy, which Paul Verhoeven, the director, went on to repeat with Starship Troopers very much, didn't he?
True enough.
I also
Kind of like a sci-fi western, isn't it? A little bit. He's kind of like the John Wayne cowboy, but he's a robot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yeah, that you've got the western in there. The music kind of gives it away. If you notice, it's western music with a bit of clanking and so on, bit of yeah, a bit of robotic sort of metallic clanking going on there.
He has kind of like a theme when he's in pursuit. When the horns come out, it sounds like John Wayne riding off to kill some Indians in the desert. He's got that sort of heart-pumping theme tune to him when he's walking around.
Yeah, that's the one I mean. Yeah, that's right.
And his kid's obsessed with the laser, basically a laser powered sheriff, and that's what he copies the gunslinging trick with. And so you can see so you can see he's referencing all these cowboy themes, and right enough, the gun comes out the side of his leg where you'd keep a leg holster.
Yeah,
for the quick draw.
Yeah, and someone's designed that aspect of Robocop's suit, hasn't he? Someone's actually thought of that. Let's imbue part of Murphy's. Almost said the wrong Murphy there. Alex Murphy's. I told myself there, but they must have implemented that on him as part of his psychological aspect of Robocop, the brain and the memory.
Yeah, we're going in for Beverly Hills Robocop there again.
Yeah, I almost done it.
Yes, Alex Murphy. It's sort of natural in a way because the leg holster. I mean, where are you going to put the gun otherwise? The thigh area is the only way you can put it, really, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's very.
Although if he was completely just a robot, you could just stuff it in his belly because he'd have no guts. You'd think, you know.
Well, yeah, but the natural way, the natural place for it would be around the thigh area. So, yeah, it's in a way it worked out quite well. A happy accident, shall we say? Because it's the only place really where he can actually put it as an integral part of himself.
Also a great special effect.
It is, yeah. We ought to mention the special effects a bit, didn't we? It's our old friend Rob Bottin again.
Right.
Yeah, from
Mastermind behind The Thing and The Fog.
Yep. Yeah.
And also his later movie, Total Recall. Was it Total Recall?
Yeah, that's right. Total Recall.
Yeah.
But we've come across him in The Thing in one of our podcasts, as you mentioned.
That's right.
Oh.
But yeah, the effects I think hold up very well in the present day. I mean, considering this is what 32 years back now.
Yeah, true enough.
and they still look better. They look better than the reboot, actually, don't they?
And I think they'll look a lot better than the reboot a few years from now once people get used to the computer graphics again even more. Because that's what happened to the Matrix. You look at the original Matrix now, when the computer graphics kick in, it often looks a bit obvious.
And to think that people maybe who haven't seen the original, maybe you're a bit too young, you can't remember, or you just haven't bothered to go around and watch it. People actually made that suit with their hands out of plastics and foams and wires and robotics. They didn't have computers that done it all for them pretty much. And that's not to take away the ability of these computer arts generators. But people actually physically had to make that suit and even make things that kept the actor cool because it was becoming too hot to wear the suit, so they had to pump air into it. And in some of the scenes, he only wore half the costume, and his lower half was some sweatpants or jogging trousers because he kept falling down the stairs because he couldn't look down. You know?
Bit like Ed 209 then.
Apparently Peter Weller almost left the set because of the suit. Apparently it took 10 hours to go through makeup to get the suit fitted and everything. And then he found that he couldn't move around in it and everything, and so he'd almost given up. But apparently they got this mime artist in from Belgium who showed him how to move around in it and walk around. And if you look, it is very heavily influenced by mime, are the movements that he uses. And it works very well, actually.
But he doesn't look like a silly robot. He doesn't look like a Doctor Who robot. You could actually believe that thing walking down the street chasing you if you just robbed a store. It didn't look preposterous, like a guy in a metal suit, even though that's effectively what it's supposed to be.
You would really think that the suit had proper hinges and ball bearings restricting the movement. It's so convincing how he moves. But as you said, he still moves in a way that could look intimidating. You could imagine that would be scary or a real threat.
Yeah. It's not like a Dalek chasing you down the street.
I think what's interesting is to compare it to the reboot suit, so the 2014 suit. Because the 2014 suit is, if you like, the expectations of that particular era, and the original suit is the expectations of the 1980s. It's sort of the future, but how a 1980s audience would imagine the future. Whereas in the 2014 version, it's how a 2014 audience would imagine the future. So you've got two different looks at it based on where technology is going. So each time they sort of based it on what they imagined and where they imagined technology would be going, and what it would be like. So I think that's quite interesting, that they had to really change the suit because the expectations were different. Although apparently they're going to come back to the original again, aren't they?
Yeah, they've given up on the 2014, despite the fact a lot of people thought it made a lot of money. It seems to have actually flopped in reality, and there's been quite a poor response with the fan base and the critics compared to the legacy of the original. So they've given up on doing a sequel to the reboot, and they're just going to start off again with a sequel to the first film, the 1987 one, just like they did with Halloween, and start off there, which is probably the best we could hope for.
Bearing in mind they've just done that with the Predator movie, and they do that quite a lot, and everybody gets their hopes up. They could make an absolute you-know-what of it.
Yeah. The trouble is, will they keep their politics out of it and just stick to the film as was, or will they actually make something that's just dreadful, like the Ghostbusters?
Will they make like Alex Murphy? Will he be some black multi-gendered something or other, just to keep everybody happy?
Yeah.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well,
I've always got the original no matter what.
Yeah, but then it will flop, of course, because we've seen that already. We've seen the backlash to Star Wars and so on, and the backlash to Ghostbusters. So if they try to keep it up, they're just going to drive audiences away. Bear in mind that the film company that actually produced Robocop, Orion, no longer exists after a series of bad decisions. So if they continue making bad decisions, they will go bankrupt. No one is too big. I mean, Orion was huge.
Yeah, yeah.
There's
A
only so
lot of
much.
people are. A lot of people are saying this now. No, recently, even the sort of lefty liberal types, even they're starting to call it out. I think everybody's getting a bit annoyed by all this poking and prodding with old classics and turning them into something completely different.
Especially as these things often have fan bases, you know, people are really keen on the whole sort of world of it, and then you suddenly say, oh, well, that character you've loved for 10, 20 years, they're now gone, or have been replaced with this new thing that you've got to pretend was always there.
Yeah.
They fell in love with the originals, they didn't fall in love with the new synthetic replacement.
Yeah.
And there's only so much they're astroturfing and they're coercing critics for morality reasons to give good reviews or advertising can do.
Yeah.
If you're serving up slop, it's still slop.
Yeah. And an interesting thing is that although, you know, there's the new politics and everyone's sort of rebelling against it now at the cinema, the original Robocop also has a certain politics imprinted on it, because Paul Verhoeven himself is a very political director, I think. But he's not quite on the same sort of SJW planet as the new ones are, if you like. He still gives the audience what they want, but still manages to package some of the leftist political slant into it through satire and things like that. And I think that the original Robocop has got some of that, to be honest, but it's not done in an egregious way. It's not too in your face, and it's, I mean, some of the casting of this colorblind casting, if you like, you'll notice that the corporate execs are all white, but there's a token black guy there. The gangs are also all white, except there's a token black guy there as well. You know, and this is in Detroit. in Detroit, you would have seriously black gangs even in 1987. But
yeah, they dodged that one though.
Yeah, they've dodged that one, absolutely.
Because I mean, Detroit's like never been well known for having its white gangs marauding.
No, that's right.
Like in Robocop.
That's right. Even in 1987, well, even in the 60s, there were riots in Detroit in the 60s, black riots in the 1960s. So in the 80s, it was even worse. And of course, about 10 years ago, it was the first city in America to go bankrupt.
Which Robocop predicted?
Yeah, absolutely, which he predicted. Also predicted in the second Robocop, the sequel, a black mayor, and also on the verge of financial disaster and being taken over by drugs and gangs and so on. So, except that the gangs, of course, are not multi-ethnic or anything like that, or largely white or something. But
yeah, it's not the Irish.
It's not the Irish. No, that's right. They're not dealing poutine.
No.
So yeah, so there is a certain amount of dishonesty, if you like, but we don't really notice it very much because it's good wholesome entertainment. I say good wholesome entertainment. It is a film that is noted for its ultraviolence as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's even by today's standards. If you watch the director's cut, I mean, the special effects maybe are a little bit over the top at times in terms of 15-second long shots of people being blasted to bits by Ed 209, but it looks good. I mean, it looks real, but it is very, very violent. I will say that, even by today's standards.
To see something like that elsewhere. You'd have to really see a horror film. It's the only place you'd see those kind of special effects in place.
Yeah.
I don't think had there been any up until that point that had been as gruesome as that, any films. Maybe Dawn of the Dead, possibly, but there wasn't really anything that violent.
No, Paul Verhoeven, he does like his gore, doesn't he? He's that sort of version of Shipley that loves violence, you know, and the titillation of violence and so on. Now, there are two scenes that I think are particularly violent. One is when Alex Murphy gets killed, and that was actually edited for the theatrical release. And the other one that was edited for the theatrical release was the one where the executive gets shot to bits by Ed 209. Now, I actually think that was a good edit on the Alex Murphy death scene, because I think that with the director's cut, where it goes on, it shows a lack of sympathy for the main protagonist. Whereas in the part where the executive gets shot to bits, and he just keeps getting shot and shot long after he's dead, I think that adds a certain amount of black comedy to it, because it becomes sort of funny because it's still going on, and then at the end, at the end they call for a medic. They call for
yeah,
that's right. Well, that's what makes it funny.
Yeah. Do you know the funny is that called Spandau Ballet? Was that like a reference to that? Somebody told me this could be one of these urban myths. Spandau Ballet. The reason they were called that is like a gun called the Spandau gun, and when people were being shot by it looked like they were dancing. And you see that in like movies where like they shake when they're getting shot at over and over and over again, like in Platoon and all that. When the guy dies, were they making fun of that and referencing something there?
Could be. I mean, Spandau Ballet, the band, were quite big at the time as well, weren't they? So could be. Yeah. Apparently, it comes from the First World War, doesn't it?
But you see that in a lot of the Vietnam movies where they're just getting shot in slow motion over and over and over again, and they're never falling down. This guy was just being obliterated by Ed 209 and just continued to shoot him for about 15 seconds.
It was a bit chunks just sort of propped up on top of each other by that point.
And no windows were broken whatsoever.
Yeah, the Vietnam thing was satirized in Tropic Thunder, of course, wasn't it? With the being shot to bits and everything. But yeah, I mean, some of the violence is, quite shocking, I suppose. Even I think the 80s action films were more violent than they are now, to be honest. I don't know what you guys think.
I mean, you think of something like Commando was pretty brutal, and that wasn't. It felt like a lot of that felt like a younger audience film, but the violence was pretty brutal in it.
We need to review that one time.
Commando.
Yeah, I think so.
We can let some steam off for that one.
Didn't we do that joke already with the Mad Max thing?
It was so good we can use it again. Shush.
It was the sequel. I think also that Peter Weller plays a very good part. Going on to Alex Murphy himself. I think that he's very expressive. One of the reasons he was chosen actually was because his face is so expressive. His lower jaw is extremely expressive, and so on. So that's why he got the part. Apparently, people who were considered included Rutger Hauer and Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they were too big. So because the suit would have been enormous, they would have been absolutely huge. So it would.
You'd never get them in the car.
No, exactly. In fact, you didn't get them in the car anyway in the first film. If you noticed, it never showed you him getting in or getting out. It's sort of.
And ironically, Rutger Hauer's the most robotic actor that ever lived. Excuse me, Rutger, could you human him up a bit?
They'd have to put a human suit in them.
That's because he's a replicant.
That's what it is.
Ah,
And a twist, the RoboCop film was when they were writing the script was what part of the inspiration was the idea of taking Blade Runner and reversing it, where you've got an artificial life form hunting down humans instead of the human keeping check on the AI or the replicants.
Mm-hmm.
people did think it was a sequel to Terminator for a long time, apparently in the 80s, because in the theatrical trailer, apparently they used the Terminator music. So people thought it was a sequel or some kind of prequel spin-off to the Terminator until Orion or whoever obtained the rights to put their own music in the trailers. But if you watch the original theatrical trailer on YouTube, it's got the Terminator music in it.
I didn't know that.
If you saw that on YouTube, you'd think it was somebody's mashup, probably, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And because back then you'd have no internet to tell you, everything about a film. All you'd know is what was in the paper or just basically a poster on outside the cinema for most people.
Yeah.
A preview on telly with that trailer, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing about Alex Murphy's death as well, looking at it, is that it's extremely realistic where they take him into hospital and so on, and that's because that's a real crash team. They didn't actually bother getting actors in. They got a real crash team, and they said, "Well, just do what you do normally." And so that's not scripted or anything. That is how a real life crash situation would play out.
It's quite smart.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally believable the way it's done. And now I know why.
Yeah.
It's not like other movies where you see them do it and you're thinking to yourself, God, thank course that's not me getting carried away by those guys.
And of course, then you have the resurrection, and then we have this sort of Jesus-y type narrative, if you like, in the script. And if you notice, Alex Murphy, he's a staunch Catholic, and you get that sort of religious aspect to it. Some people have seen this idea that the old man is God. The old man who runs OCP, that they've seen him as God. Because it doesn't actually have a name. It's just called the old man throughout the film.
And he's not good or bad, is he? You don't really know what he is. He's just this guy at the top. You think he's kind of bad, but towards the end you're like, okay, but I kind of like him now.
Yeah. This is the weird thing actually about the whole narrative, because if we sort of move on to Robocop 2, he has a very different vibe to in the first Robocop. In the first Robocop, he seems quite benign at times. In the second Robocop, he's an absolute bastard.
I think that happens.
Yeah.
I think that happens because in the first one, he was so detached. All he cared about was the money. So if you actually watch it, I mean, the guy's brutally murdered by Ed 209 right in front of him, and he's talking about, this is going to cost us 50 million in interest payments. So that kind of gives you a hint what he is and who he is. The only reason you don't see him, you don't see him directly doing the bad stuff because he's got his corporate henchmen to do it for him. He doesn't get his hands dirty directly, but that doesn't make him a good guy any more than it would, say, a mafia boss who sends out a hitman.
Yep.
I think it's with the ending as well, where he's actually rescued by Murphy or Robocop, and he asks him his name and everything, and of course he turns around and says Murphy, and you get that impression that they're on the same side. And of course he's just been held hostage by his understudy, by Dick. It's a bit of
a sort of palace coup in action.
Yeah, that's right. But I suppose because Dick's the bad guy, you think that the old man is the good guy somehow, and because he's on the side of Robocop, it's so it's quite confusing at times, to be honest. Because I suppose we're used to having that straight good, straight bad guy narrative, which you don't really get with Verhoeven films at times.
No, it's a bit more blurred. Because there's corporate people you might feel sympathetic with, but if you really think about it, anybody on the old man's board, you find out pretty quick must have been involved in a lot of shady stuff as well.
Yeah, that's very true.
So even the guy that gets blown apart by Ed 29, he was either quite happily to get involved in it in the future, or he already was involved with a lot of really horrible stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as I say, he's a complete villain in the second RoboCop. Although he's not the main villain, if you like, but he is still at the top of villainy, really. It's sort of
They make it more personal.
Yeah, that's right. He gets more of a role in the second one, and you see more of who he is.
But it's also fitting. I mean, he does exactly what you'd imagine the character in the first probably would do. You would throw everybody else under the bus at the first instant.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's a typical corporate way of doing things.
Yeah.
I mean, a guy more accurate.
I mean, a guy who just sees some kid get blown apart and then worries about interest payments immediately. That's what he would do. You know?
Yeah, and these, of course, they are huge satires on corporate America. And I suppose they still ring true now, perhaps even more so.
Well, especially as the power and the size of these companies only gets bigger with time. I mean, the things that they say that with the old Bell phone company that was broken up in America. You look at the size of Google, Facebook, and Amazon; they're even bigger than the old Bell phone company was. Yet it was considered too big to allow years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So, if anything, since Robocop's time, it's got worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, though, he's sort of a defender of the status quo. He's a defender of corporate America, even in this satire, where he's the good guy. It's very odd.
I suppose it's the kind of even the good cop's dilemma, where he's got to work within the rules and the law, even if he knows that there's scumbags in a company. He can't directly do anything about it. You know, he's not a vigilante; he's a cop, so he can't just gun the old man down. But he knows Dick Johns is a bad one. He's got that on film, and he's directly threatening somebody in front of him, so he can finally act.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, at the end of the second one, he sort of makes a judgment, doesn't he? About because they say, "Oh, he's getting away," meaning the old man, and he what does he say now at the end of the second RoboCop? He says something like, "There's always another time," or something like that.
Can't remember.
And it sort of sets it up for the next sequel, which would be RoboCop 3.
Oh dear.
Which Peter Weller was wise enough to stay away from.
Yeah, absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, it is.
It also 3 cut out the one of the things I really love about the first 2, which was all the stop motion models, which was really fantastic. Even now, if you look at the director's cut in high definition on a big screen at home, you'll still think that the Ed 29 stop motion and all the rest, it looks good. You won't think, oh, this is terrible, you know?
Yeah, in fact, that's a very good scene in the first one where Robocop unscrews his helmet, to have it, so that you can see the full face and everything, and the mask stretched over the mechanical workings and everything. And Paul Verhoeven was terrified that this would not hold up, this effect would not hold up in daylight, and Rob Bottin said, "No, it will. And Paul Verhoeven didn't speak to him for ages, and until there was the private showing of the film to the staff and everything. And then all of a sudden Verhoeven sort of went over to Bottin and went, "Oh, you're brilliant."
Yeah. The little tiff was over.
Yeah, that's right. Because it is a superb effect.
Yeah.
And
it has a lot of impact in the film too. It's not just there for the sake of it.
No, that's right. because it gives it that humanizing effect. And it was, it could have gone very wrong if it didn't have that humanizing effect to it, even though it's grotesque in a way.
Mm. You felt pity for him in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Which helped, because otherwise he was just this invincible robot. It made you think, oh, this is some poor guy now.
That's right, because that mask, it's not human flesh, because it would just decay. It's actually shown in the second film. Some critics, bizarrely, have said, why doesn't anyone shoot him in the lower jaw? Thinking that that's all flesh and blood, but it's not. It's mechanical, and that is just a mask that's that's stretched over the face. Because in the second film, he gets his wife to touch it, and she says it's cold.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's cold. So
it's no longer human.
That's right. It's just a mask. That's it's been molded in the shape of his old face.
And you see the skin looks. It's so they've put some sort of makeup on him, and it looks so even. It does look fake.
Do you think it was like some way for the engineers of the suit to add a human element to him? So if he was supposed to be a cop, it wasn't a robot coming after you sent it by the police. It was actually a him coming after you by giving that a face. It was almost like a terror attack or a terrorist kind of ploy to scare people by using a real guy's face.
Also, maybe because Ed 29 was thought they were thinking about warfare applications. The cop part of it was only just to get the foot in the door. Yet Robocop was straight away from the front, made for policing. So you want a human face on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely
because it's more scary. I think it'd be more scary if you had a robot with a human face, or just like a robot in general. If you knew it had a face, it would be a lot more terrifying for the criminal.
I'd imagine it'd also give you hesitation maybe in attacking it too, because you can imagine people would attack a chittering box of electronics more freely, because there's no moral sort of, other than the cost of the item, there's no moral holdback for it. Well, a person, it feels, it hurts. So if you see something human, you go, oh, he's complaining about littering, so fair enough, I'll sort that out. Nobody's going to lash out at a human, well, not unless you're a psychopath, over a complaint about littering or something minor.
Yeah.
But a robot, somebody could just lose their temper because they've had a bad day and kick it over. In theory, you wouldn't feel any compassion for it.
Yeah, on the meta level, of course, it's so that the audience can relate to it as well.
Yeah, because that's what they did in Robocop 2. Of course, they stuck him as a brain in a jar, sealed away, and it made him look horrendous.
Yeah, I
think they went too far with that. I think.
Really,
there was some silly parts of it, but I still like the models. I think the models were fantastic in motion, and there's the best modelling I've ever seen was when you see the scenes where Robocop's sort of wrestling and it's hanging onto the top of the evil robot. And that's all models when you look at it closely. It's amazing how it's done, the speed of the motion and the clarity of it. I can't imagine how long it must take to do that in stop motion and plan it all out. It's tremendous.
Yeah, it wasn't
no
Wallace and
CGI
Gromit,
needed.
was it? It was incredible. It wasn't like a Wallace and Gromit sort of style claymation. It was like actual models.
High detail, because you've got to zoom into that to fill the screen. So when he's making that model, it's not a 6 foot plus model. He's manipulating something the size of your hand, zooming in on it, and it still looks high detail. It's incredible work, and he's got to get the speed of the motion and the right inertia and movement, which he does great. The big robot looks heavy, while Robocop gets thrown about much lighter. It's very believable.
Yeah.
But it's a distillation of years of expertise, and he in turn was inspired by Harryhausen, which you've probably seen his work in. Yeah, Sinbad, which I really like, with the skeletons. Everybody remembers the skeletons.
That's right.
Which still looks great now.
I actually went to the cinema to see Clash of the Titans.
Oh,
that's a great movie.
That's a good one.
Yep. So yeah, I was always a fan of Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah. I said, well, Phil Tippett was inspired by him. He says straight up he saw Sinbad, and that's what made him choose his career. So we've got Harryhausen to thank for Robocop in a way through inspiring him. He inspired a new generation of artists with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is good, like you said, the way even the animator took into account for the physics of what would happen during a fight. It wouldn't just be one guy throwing a punch, stepping back and dodging. It actually looked like Robocop was wrestling with this guy.
Yeah. And you see him bump into things around, like the bit with the steam pipes and stuff, you know, so they've planned that all out tremendously. It's real craftsmanship from, you know, the ground up.
Absolutely.
And then you compare that to 3, where they start getting sloppy with CGI.
And I sort of disagree with with this idea of it being bad that the bad robots don't have a face. I think that sort of separates on a meta-narrative level the good from the evil, if you see what I mean. The evil robots are dehumanized by not having a human face,
which suits his sort of insane and almost inhuman behaviour too.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he was pretty horrendous to start with. The actor does a great job of making them scary, and then when he's put in the suit, it only amplifies it. He's even more horrific.
Yeah,
and when they do give him the face, it too is this uncanny valley horrific CGI face in a panel that's screaming and screeching at you, totally insane.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the actor Tom Noonan, who plays Kane, he's the guy out of Manhunter, the Tooth Fairy. If you remember. Yeah. So he's I mean, he's terrifying in that. So you've got this terrifying bad guy who becomes an even more terrifying robot.
Yeah.
Yes, put the evil torturer and mass murderer in a giant killer robot suit. What could go wrong?
But the thing about Robocop 2 is it's got all the right elements, and yet doesn't seem to get it as right as Robocop for some reason. Even though it could have been just as good a film as Robocop, the first Robocop. And I mean, although it's not Paul Verhoeven who's behind the camera, this time it's Irving Kershner, who of course directed the Star Wars film Empire Strikes Back. So, you know, he's got
bit of a miss for him.
Yeah, but I think he's let down a bit by the script, which was actually written by Wallen Green, but mainly by Frank Miller, the Frank Miller, who's got a very good reputation.
I think he worked in Robocop 3 as well.
He did, yeah.
Which is a bit embarrassing for him.
Yeah. But Frank Miller's script is appalling when you look at it. It's a mishmash and it's a jumble and there's too much in it. What he's tried to do is he's tried to overcomplicate things by throwing things in, and it just doesn't work. You see that whole thing where he gets reprogrammed and everything. That lasts about 20 minutes. So that's
the same where he's shooting people for smoking outside and stuff.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah,
that could have been either the film itself but it ended up just a distraction, isn't it?
That's right. It wasn't developed enough to go anywhere.
Yeah, it was just sort of everything in the kitchen sink ideas. There was no filter. They should have focused it more and developed it from that.
That's right. It was a redundant subplot, really, and a distraction that really went nowhere.
Which you can't do in a cinema when you're really tight for time. You can get away with that with television, but you can't do that in a cinematic situation where you're spending $1 million a minute or something.
No, that's right. And the other thing is that we didn't really get that much of the villain Tom Noonan before he got made into a robot. There should have been,
even though he's brilliant.
Yeah, that's right. There should have been more of a focus instead of doing that silly thing with Robocop being reprogrammed. They should have focused more on this idea of him being a messianic figure and developed him more, because we had that.
Because that's another dead end.
Yeah, it is. It's completely redundant again.
Yeah, because they built up a sort of pseudo-religious element to the drugs, and right enough, by the end of it, that was just forgotten about.
Yeah.
Which was a brilliant idea itself. You could have these gangs with bizarre pseudo-religious obsessions and the drugs that's changing their minds, but that was all just a dead end. There's the kid as well. The kid was just kind of pointless.
Well, I personally think that the kid was to sort of set you up for Robocop 3, which was aimed more at a kids market actually, and I think one of the reasons is that it was to do with marketing and particularly to marketing toys. So I think it was going that way, and so you still got a lot of the ultraviolence in Robocop 2, but then it got completely watered down for Robocop 3 as they aimed towards kids, just as they did with the first two Mad Max films and then made Beyond Thunderdome, which has a completely different tone to it, as we've discussed earlier in an earlier podcast.
Yeah, number 3 was like a kids' film. I mean, you had the plucky kid that could hack and so on. Also introduced a lot of nonsense with the kind of more of a political bent to it. You had the freedom fighter, and it felt watered down. It was a complete shadow. And while you said that 2 had the right ingredients, but it just wasn't maybe baked right, 3 you just knew was a disaster from the start. It felt cheap and hollow.
Yeah,
and
there
they
was
gave
no
him a jetpack as well, didn't they? The jetpack.
Oh,
I'm sure someone like the writing room was like, well, it takes a long time for Robocop to get up those stairs. What are we going to do about that? Let's just give him a jetpack. So
that was dreadful.
Well, I think that again is marketing to kids.
Yeah, so they could buy Robocop toys with attachment jetpack.
Yeah,
attachment machine gun arm.
Yeah,
that's sad, isn't it?
You can imagine a kid, flying, holding the figure there, flying it around, and so on. Someone obviously thought at some point, what would appeal to kids, better than Robocop? Robocop with a jetpack.
What else? Machine gun arm. What else? A hockey stick arm. Like, oh.
You just know there would be all the accessories and gadgets, and they'd be selling them all for overinflated prices for the lumps of plastic.
Yeah, I think if I'm right, the Robocop figures came out in 1993, which was the same year as Robocop 3. So
it was
yeah,
very cynical move.
Yeah, absolutely, a corporate move indeed. Which the first 2 Robocops have been taking the piss out of.
So yeah, the old man won.
The old man won, yeah. You get a bit more shit liberalism, don't you, in Robocop 3 as well?
Oh yeah, you've got the black freedom fighter and the people dressing up as pseudo-Nazis with the uniforms. They bring in from elsewhere as well, so you've got the feeling of them being foreign invaders. They're all white, and you've got the kind of diverse people fighting against it. Even the kid comes from a mixed race family.
Yep.
So it sort of brings everything you could imagine together.
Yeah, and this is back in '93, as I say. So this is quite an early example.
What year was that Rodney King incident and all those riots happening? Was that 93 or 94? Around about that time, wasn't it? Early 90s?
Yeah, it was early 90s, you're right.
Yeah, could that have been one of the reasons?
Could be, yeah. I think it was 91, was it?
Yeah, there was some sort of tone shift around then.
It was an absolute bastard anyway, that Rodney King, I mean, probably one of the reasons he got a good kicking was he absolutely deserved it, and the coppers realised that.
Controversial.
Yeah,
he did, though.
I don't see any controversy with what I've just said. It went back to criminal behaviour anyway afterwards. Anyway.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the first film again, and the sort of, there's this sort of era magic when you get a good film that just seems to come together. Apparently, when the scene in the cocaine factory when they were all shooting out, the reason why it chops and moves so quick, the camera work, is because the guns kept jamming. So, the guns that were using, firing blanks, were kept jamming. So they ended up having to cut the scene in a very fast pace because obviously they couldn't do a long shootout. But then the director said it ended up working out for the better. And you wonder how much movie magic is these sort of happy accidents when you get a real winner. You know, how is it maybe 90% hard work and expertise, and there's that 10% luck that adds to the magic of it.
Is that the scene near the start where all the cops are lined up and you hear Alex Murphy's gun in the background and it kind of pans over them all shooting, but the guy at the very end of the booth, his guns obviously is jammed or broken because the top part of the gun is showing that it's gone empty or something's happened, but his arm's still kind of out poking. You can see his finger moving a little bit, even though he's not actually firing anything from the gun.
I was actually meaning the scene where Robocop kicks the door down and there's and the shootout at the factory with Bodecker.
Oh yeah, in the drugs warehouse, right?
Yeah, and they all start shooting. Well, that scene has such a fast pace because they had to keep cutting because the guns were all jamming over and over again. So they could only get a few rounds at a time. And that ended up making the whole scene feel more action-oriented rather than long, drawn-out shots. So it sort of sped up the pace of it by accident.
Did you read the little trivia part about that scene? Apparently, Weller listened to Peter Gabriel's Red Rain on loop and on headphones underneath the helmet to get himself into like the swing of like the motions and moving about. Oh. Peter Gabriel's Red Rain.
There's a twist.
Yeah.
You don't imagine it that when it's going on.
I'm never going to watch that scene in the same light ever again.
You have to play that as well over it now.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning as well we're thinking about the effects and the scenes is looking at it again for anybody sort of interested in trying their own sort of craft in this area. Things like the infrared scene with the mayor where Robocop saves the mayor. The mayor was going mad and so on, and they're trying to save her. Do you remember there's the infrared scene he sees through the walls?
Oh yeah.
Well, that was done with body paint because they couldn't afford an infrared camera, so they got them to strip down and painted their body with infrared paint. Fluorescent paint, and just shone a black light to get it to really glow. And they just put over the top that's kind of CRT scan lines effect, and it looks great. Somebody
thought of that. Can you believe that? Somebody actually thought that in their head, how to do that. How to make a computerized infrared screen look like a computerized infrared screen, even though there wasn't such thing.
Yeah. And rather than try to do it any legit way, he's just come up with this great idea with the body paint to say, that saved him a fortune.
Yeah, so some of the best effects are often the simplest. We've looked at John Carpenter before, and how he saves money by doing really simple effects, but which work really well.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a tendency to assume just because a famous film uses a lot of CGI or some multi-million-dollar effect, you can still, you can't, or you can no longer do something that looks good with, basically a bucket of paint and a black light. What would that cost them? Probably about $20 for the paint and the light.
There's
it really would. It wouldn't cost you much for fluorescent paint and a black light tube.
It's going slightly to another film just for a few seconds, but at the start of Escape from New York, when you see Snake Plissken and he's going in a glider into New York, and you see the sort of fluorescent edges of the buildings on this like VR screen he has in front of him, and it looks like he's flying over Manhattan Island. Apparently, it was actually James Cameron that designed that special effect, and he just basically built a model city with that glow-in-the-dark paint and just like shone like a black light at it. So you can see how people had to really use their minds back then to figure out how to do this sort of thing. They didn't have computers. Well, they did, but they were in their infancy. Not like today, where you could just go on. Anybody could do that. People had to design, paint, build all these things themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, people still can. That's the thing. Especially now we've got things like 3D printers and what. It must be an absolute dream for a prop maker.
I'll tell you what trap Escape from New York falls into, though, and Blade Runner as well, which Robocop does not. They give you a date. They give you a year in the future when this is going to happen, whereas Robocop doesn't. It avoids it. And I think that that's very well done actually, because then it never dates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you haven't got that thing. Oh, that film Escape from New York about that time that never actually happened.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've
Uh,
seen with Terminator, he keeps waiting for Judgment Day, and you go, wait a minute, it happened about 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the complicated timelines that you've got now in the Terminator series, where things that didn't happen because this happened and so on, and the past changed and everything. It's just, it's nonsense, isn't it? Really?
It really is. It's
But
it's
when, as
such.
you say, if you just avoided the dates, you'd save a lot of hassle. Just let the fans make up whatever they like.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the beauty about RoboCop. The beauty is the opening scene, where you have this shot over Detroit, and then you get the news, and it gives you what's happening. And the wonderful thing is, what do they say? Give us 3 minutes, and we'll give you the world. And that's, it's simultaneously talking to the audience as well. That's what they're going to do in the first 3 minutes. It's going to set the scene. It's going to show you exactly what the world's like, America's like, and and Detroit's like. So lots of rioting, lots of police deaths and so on, and crime spiraling out of control, and the police not being able to handle it. Just in the first 3 minutes, you've got all that, everything you need to know for the rest of the film. Bump, done.
It's like the first Mad Max, when we mentioned the sign that told you all about the setting. People should go back and watch that as well as subscribe. And that scene, opening scene of Mad Max, was one of the cleverest out of the whole series. Yet, when we see the same thing happen here with Robocop, with that news snippet with the two people talking for a wee bit, sets a great scene, gives you all the backstory, and you don't need a long text scroll or some horrible monologue over the top of the scene to start with.
And remember, the least important news story is the last story where they say, and lastly, 3 cops are dead. And like that's the least worrying thing in their society. Most of all the other nonsense that's on the news. And if you watch the rest of the movie, everybody seems to be engrossed by the television at some point. Like whether they're good, bad, indifferent, they all seem to be engrossed by television. They laugh absurdly whenever that guy comes on the screen and says, "I'll buy that for $1." Like they're crying with laughter. And it's strange, isn't it, how everyone seems to be affected by this, whether they're a criminal or not.
It's also a great wee scene to set up all the grudges for the cops and why they are threatening strikes and so on. It could have taken another half hour to set that whole scene up if you didn't have the expertise and the cleverness that Verhoeven and the scriptwriters did.
Yeah, because
and
instantly, it was also, that city's an absolute hellhole. Yeah. And they picked Detroit for a reason, didn't they? They didn't pick Palm Springs or anything.
There's also the wee scene in that same snippet where before it they talk about the South African collapse as well, where they're talking about the white government in the city holding out with a neutron bomb, and they show scenes of a white guy lying in the ground getting the shit kicked out of him by the black mob, which is, you would never see in the Robocop remake.
No, you wouldn't.
Talk about a white city state holding out as a kind of if people are encroaching on them.
Yeah,
but even still, is Travis Boddicker like the main bad guy? I consider him to be. I know the older guy in the business suit, Dick.
Yeah,
they're both called Dick actually, but I consider Travis to be the bad guy, and I think it's funny how they made him look. And apparently, from what I've read, I'm not sure what you guys have read, but apparently Verhoeven imagined him to be like Heinrich Himmler and gave him a set of glasses because he suddenly, when he put his glasses on, he became Heinrich Himmler in Verhoeven's mind. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I heard a different story, which was basically that they wanted him to look like a criminal, but an intelligent criminal. And so, Verhoeven just tried him with a pair of glasses. Or it might have even been the actor who tried it himself and put these pair of glasses on, and suddenly, he looks like an intelligent criminal.
Which he did play as.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, what you said, Neil, about you don't know which one is the main criminal here. You know, which one is the big bad guy. Actually, they're on sort of the same level, and you get that when they have that meeting. They have that meeting in the office, and you see them as equals.
Yeah. And they both refer to each other as Dick, and when they say it, they really say it, don't they? They really make like a deliberate attempt to say their name Dick as loud as they can, or as provocatively as they can to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul Verhoeven doesn't like dicks, does he? Yeah, you get someone shot in the dick as well at some point.
Oh,
yeah.
So yeah, bit of a feminist message there, I think. He is a shitlib. He did a film called Black Books, which was his Zionist propaganda film.
Oh, didn't know that one.
Yeah. But that's after he's gone back to the Netherlands, so it's a Dutch film.
Right.
He's, he started out in Holland, went over to America, to Hollywood, and then went back again. So, yeah.
So Robocop's a good, despite him, almost at times.
Well, he did do he did done Basic Instinct, didn't he? Or was it Showgirls? I think he'd done them both, actually. Showgirls and Basic Instinct. I'm pretty sure of that. So he's a bit of a degenerate sort of person, isn't he? I mean, he's not like a good, wholesome family man.
No, but I mean, he is a good film director. Let's not be
absolutely.
about it. And he always sort of plays with fascism. It's the same with Starship Troopers. He's always playing around with fascism, fascist iconography and stuff like that. I mean, Robocop is almost a pro-fascistic film in a way, because you never question the coppers. You get a bent cop in the second film, but that's not Verhoeven. And and you have this sort of machine-like hero who doesn't question things. He has a complete idea of what is right, and heavily influenced by his Roman Catholic background, and so on. It's and Starship Troopers is even sort of even more fascistic than that, although it's a satire. The audience is actually on the side of the sort of quasi-fascistic society. But I suppose we're going to do that film in a future episode, so I'll not get too much into that.
I suppose one of the things that's happening there is, if he's a director of quality and you've got story writers of quality, back then at least, when they were leaning towards the left, they still had to accept that the aesthetics and the possibilities of that fascistic overtone would open up for them was far greater than just them giving into whatever their own particular personal fantasies are.
And remember what the bad guys are referred to as. Robocop calls them cop killers. Like, he doesn't say drug dealers or criminals or murderers. It's a cop killer. That was their crime. So it shows that how the tone of the movie, it isn't anti-cop, it isn't indifferent. It's a film that's supposed to make you get behind cops.
Yeah, that's right. The cops are unquestionably the good guys.
Yeah.
Equally, of course, you have a Black Death Sergeant, who's sort of the really good authoritarian character. That comes really from... There was a survey going back to that casting, colour casting and everything that we mentioned earlier. There was a survey done in 1977 about the representation of black characters on television and film, which supposedly showed that they were discriminated against and so on. And that really got more black authority figures onto screen. There was a push towards having more black authority film figures on screen and so on. So that's where it comes from. Yeah, exactly. So that's why you get an awful lot of Black Death Sergeants and so on, and captains and everything. if you notice.
It is a sort of Hollywood trope now.
Very much so. Shall we move along to the remake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think
there wasn't much enthusiasm there, but
I think the trouble is that I don't like the remake, and 2 and 3 though are even worse. Well, 2 not so much, but 3, you know, we've had enough of that.
Yeah.
Especially with the whole robot samurai nonsense as well. I mean, I forgot about that subplot because it is so forgettable.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's marketed towards kids. Same with the series as well. I watched a few episodes of the series back in the 90s when it first came out, and I barely remember it. The only thing I remember is that Emil, who dies, of course, in the first Robocop, he comes back as a sort of toxic Avenger kind of character.
No.
Which is tonally completely inappropriate if you think of the first one.
Yeah, exactly, but as a comedy relief as well.
Oh, good.
So it was really bizarre, and I've never watched the cartoon, so I can't really talk about that.
It was 2 cartoon series.
There was more than one.
Yeah, one of them was made closer
no.
to the films, and then another was made much later with like Spider, Robocop, and bizarre stuff. I think it came out of Canada or something.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, it's all the kind of mod. It's right, just all out, just bizarre, totally tonal shifted. You know, ridiculous. I have no interest in watching it. I saw some screen caps and just shook my head and moved on.
Yeah,
That was enough.
They really did their best to trash it, didn't they? And then didn't do much better with the reboot, in my opinion. Now, the thing is that I don't hate the reboot because I can't remember it much.
Yeah.
It's not memorable.
It's a by-the-numbers action film, watered down. It doesn't even feel like Robocop, which they've almost went out their way to do by changing even the... They could have hung on to the Robocop aesthetics a bit more, but they just completely removed it.
Yeah, he doesn't even feel like a cop, does he?
No.
He doesn't feel like Alex the cop.
No, the character's changed hugely. And even like the relationship between him and the doctors are now, instead of being completely unsympathetic corporate staff, the doctor's now sympathetic, and they make a point of showing how caring he is towards people. You know, so they've completely changed the story. You know, instead of Alex Murphy being this man against the world, trying to overcome his kind of new inhuman nature, the whole film in the reboot, he's an emotional being. He's getting all this emotional support from his family, emotional support from the doctor, and everybody feels sympathetic for him. It's a completely different situation to the first, where it was basically Murphy versus the world, and he has to win over people to kind of side with them.
Yeah, there isn't the same dystopianism. There isn't the same satire on corporate America. There is a little bit, but not like the first one. There's not the humour in there.
No, it was very flat and just kind of shallow, very shallow. It's like the 14-year-old boy's version of Robocop. You know, the one he would do now. Lots of effects. You know, lots of leaping about and shooting and explosions. Which, obviously, the first one did have a lot of effects, but they were there for a reason. They weren't just there to, you know, pump out, you know, another generic action film.
Yeah, and I think that's the best word for it, generic.
Is there anything redeeming about it? When we say anything positive, it can't be that bad.
I think that Gary Oldman and Michael Keaton did a decent job as actors in it.
But you wouldn't go out your way to watch that film just to see them in this.
No.
No, that's right. Because I think that Michael Keaton plays a decent bad guy, which was a bit of a revelation because he's not really noted for that. Gary Oldman, well, I mean, really, Gary Oldman, I suppose you could say that he plays more or less the same role as he does in the Dark Knight films.
Yeah.
Not
that very
much,
similar.
Yeah, not that much different, to be honest. But you know, he does a decent job. Samuel L. Jackson is appalling and completely miscast, I think, as the newscaster.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was terrible.
yeah.
When you compare the original new stuff, it was great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in the first film, the interspersed adverts and bits of news and so on, they're used very well. But in the second one, the sequel to that, I felt that they were just intrusive because they weren't used very well
Rambly.
as part of the satire and so on. And in this one, the 2014 film, they're just really forgettable. It's just like Samuel L. Jackson's commentary on what things, what's going on and so on. But again, it's more or less telling the audience what to think.
Yeah, you should kind of hint and show them. You don't just ram it down their throat and tell them.
That's right.
That's what we were talking about the first scene, talking about, and lastly, so many dead cops. That was a brilliant bit of storytelling. Well, and the new one, what they would do is they'd have to make this big sweeping 3D fancy thing. Was it? Oh, here's this, and by the way, there's some dead cops, and by the way, the cops are really upset about this. They would explain it to you as if you were simple.
That's right.
Instead of just letting you work it out for yourself in that couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And the other thing wrong with that, and also a lot in Robocop, was the original Robocop parodied and used the inspiration of things that were around at the time. Now, part of that would be obviously limitations of the technology area for filmmaking, but a lot of that was wise decisions one way or another, whether deliberate or not, because it makes it fit in its time. What is Samuel L. Jackson parodying? I've never turned on the telly and saw somebody standing in a dark room sweeping their arms about as 3D holograms flow around them. It's bizarre.
No.
It doesn't look real now. And the trouble with it is there's no way he's going to predict what things are going to look like in the future exactly. So it's not even going to fit in 20 years from now. It'll still look weird. While Robocop 20 years from now will look like a perfect parody of its time.
Yeah, you can still imagine that happening now, opposed to like what the remake made us think, which was in the near future, we're going to live in this utopian society where we'll have all this science breakthroughs, but all this terrorism going on around the world at the same time, and we need to create these big robots. It's drivel because all that stuff will be irrelevant in a few years' time. Whereas we can watch Robocop and just say, well, Detroit's like that now.
Yeah.
Not much has changed since the early 80s when it came out. It's always going to be relevant.
Yeah, and that's the thing about great art. It should be great for its own time and should speak to its own time, but also for all time.
Yeah.
The only part that they would even try to touch on anything kind of current or relevant to the current times was the kind of hints about the occupation in the Middle East sort of stuff. And that was about it. And that was basically a completely unnecessary part of the film too, because you never come back. It never came back to that. They just showed some of the robots shooting some people. They gave you a sort of slightly sympathetic look at suicide bombers, and that was about it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there was no real biting commentary, but biting commentary in an entertaining way.
And but the closest they came was a very weak kind of wink where the kid with the knife runs out again to build up the sympathy. The kid runs out despite the parents' warning, and he gets shot up because he's holding this weapon by the robot. And then you hear them say, "Oh, we'll just drop that footage." They're not going to record it. It's like, it's a bit weak, isn't it? As criticism goes, you've set up this whole scene, and that's the best you can come up with about the media. Yeah. Well, in the original, it was very biting, very clever.
That's right. And if that went into the original, they would probably have that kid like blown sky high, so there's just his shoes left or something like that, and they would have added to the black humor as well. And then the journalist would have said, "Cut it out, shut it down."
Or they might all rubbed hands and said, "This'll sell."
It is bad storytelling though when you have to resort to such a cheap gag for killing a kid just to make you feel hate and resentment towards one of the characters in the movie.
Yeah, it was very cheap. It was like the whole, getting him to kill a dog or something on screen just to establish him as a villain.
Like when you watch John Wick, I mean, you want the guy to die only because he shot the guy's dog. That's the only thing you really want him to get revenge for. It's a cheap trick, but that's what they went with. You didn't need that kind of cheap trick in the first one. I mean, you just know that it was this good cop and he had good intentions. He went in maybe a bit naively and ended up dying as a result. You don't need to have this ultra evil kid killer in order for him to get a motive for how evil these things are or whatever.
Yeah, and everybody in the first one acted in a more, considering the parody elements too, but on a more realistic way, more believable.
Yeah.
The cops were professional and serious. The gangsters were serious in their own way, and and Boddicker was intelligent, because you'd have to be to manage the kind of criminal empire he had, but he was still dangerous, and obviously not somebody you want to trust.
Yeah.
Well, in the remake, the cops are all pettily sniping each other. It's a very bitchy. They're all kind of trying to compete in the station. Compare that to the original, where everybody's sort of under stress, but they're all kind of coming together and still understand there's a job to do.
Yeah,
well, in the new one, they're all petty and childish. And even the supposed villains feel weak. I mean, the original, you had the criminal villain and the corporate villain coming together, which was great because it shows the two kind of faces of villainy working together. But in the new one, you had the kind of pseudo Apple executive, and it didn't make much sense, how he behaved. It was a kind of stupid evil rather than, realistic or clever.
Yeah.
Has anyone any last thoughts on this then, before we bring things to a close?
I would say I'm glad that they're not going to make a sequel to the reboot, and hopefully in a couple of years from now we'll be watching the reboot and be actually quite happy for once.
I agree with that. Robocop is a good film. You need to check it out if you haven't seen it before. Try and avoid the remake. Absolutely avoid everything that came after Robocop, as far as I'm concerned. Even 2.
I suppose looking on to the sequel to the first film, the reboot sequel to the first film that's going to come out. In other words, this belated sequel, as though Robocop 2 never came out.
Yeah.
What do we expect from it exactly?
It's just hard to tell, isn't it? I mean, considering the way things are going, sometimes we get lucky and you get something like Halloween, the recent one, which wasn't. I know you weren't a big fan of it, Dave, but I thought it was not bad. It could have been a lot worse. There was things that maybe we'd quibble about, but you feel like you've got to be grateful for what you get in a way, in a sense. We get fed occasional scraps of something decent.
Yeah, we should be grateful for small Murphys.
Oh dear!
Oh,
you had that written down before this started. Don't pretend.
Yeah, looking forward to that one.
He's been waiting for the chance to drop that
in. Dear. Then I think we'll end it on that terrible pun. So, good night from me.
And I'll just add, dead or alive, you're subscribing to us.
Yes, subscribe, you buggers. Subscribe. Or otherwise there will be trouble. So good night everyone, and we hope to see you again next time.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.